I can't believe this is happening on the day I trusted most, Evelyn Carter whispered to herself as she stood in the center of her sunlit living room, the antique clock ticking steadily above the mantel. Every detail of the morning had been meticulously planned. She had polished the silverware until it shone, laid out the china she had saved for decades, and arranged fresh lilies in the crystal vase by the window. The air smelled faintly of vanilla from the candles she had lit, their flames dancing gently against the morning light streaming through the sheer curtains. The house was quiet, filled only with the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant chirping of birds outside. She had been expecting her son Michael to arrive early, bringing with him the promise he had made weeks ago, the one that had kept her heart buoyed through lonely nights and endless preparation. Each clock tick amplified the tension in the room, a silent drumbeat marking the countdown to a confrontation she had feared yet hoped to avoid. She smoothed the folds of her pastel dress, taking in the subtle gleam of the hardwood floor she had waxed the night before, and tried to steady the nervous flutter in her chest. Her hands, though wrinkled and marked by years of careful labor, moved with precision as she adjusted the placement of the napkins and silverware, a ritual that had always brought her a sense of calm. Evelyn's eyes wandered to the framed photographs lining the walls, capturing moments of laughter and triumph, each one a testament to the years she had poured into her family. Her gaze lingered on a picture of Michael as a boy, his smile wide and carefree, and a pang of something unspoken tightened her chest. There was a sharp knock at the door, a sudden intrusion into the careful stillness of the morning. She straightened, took a deep breath, and moved toward the entrance with measured steps. As she opened the door, Michael's face appeared, a polite smile barely masking an unfamiliar hardness in his eyes. He stepped in, hands in his pockets, glancing briefly at the table before looking away, his movements precise but oddly distant. Evelyn felt a flicker of unease, a subtle shift in the atmosphere she could not yet name. She welcomed him with a calm, "Good morning, Michael," her voice steady but carrying the weight of her anticipation. He nodded curtly, his eyes darting to the clock, then to the kitchen, avoiding the gaze that had once held so much warmth between mother and son. She gestured toward the breakfast nook, where a tray of freshly baked scones and a pot of chamomile tea waited, steam curling softly in the air. Michael glanced at the scones, offered a brief thank you, and took a seat, his movements deliberate, measured, distant. The conversation began cautiously, small talk filled with the expected pleasantries of a morning greeting, yet every word seemed laden with an undercurrent of tension. Evelyn's mind raced, parsing each phrase, each pause, the subtle shifts in tone that hinted at secrets unspoken. The day that was meant to be a moment of promise and connection now held the faintest trace of treachery, a shadow that crept into the light-filled room, bending the familiar into something unsettlingly strange. She poured the tea with deliberate care, the liquid steaming in delicate china cups, and placed a cup in front of Michael, who accepted it without a word. Each action, each measured step, built a rhythm, a counterpoint to the silent unease threading through the room. Evelyn's heart pounded softly, not in fear but in the tense anticipation of revelations she sensed were imminent. Outside, the wind rustled the leaves, a gentle yet insistent reminder of time passing, and she felt the weight of the morning pressing against her awareness. Her thoughts lingered on the promise that had brought her to this point, the trust she had placed in her son, and the knowledge that every carefully laid plan could be disrupted in an instant. She watched Michael's hands as they rested lightly on the table, the slight tremor she noticed in the morning light betraying the composure he projected. Evelyn's gaze swept the room one last time, noting the careful symmetry of her arrangements, the quiet dignity of the space she had maintained, and felt a tightening in her chest, a mixture of hope and dread. The first words that broke the fragile calm carried with them a subtle sharpness, a hint of the upheaval to come, and Evelyn braced herself, not with anger but with the silent strength that had defined her life, prepared to meet the moment with quiet resilience and unwavering presence. The conversation in the dining room remained tense, a fragile quiet stretching between Evelyn Carter and her son Michael as she moved slowly around the space, adjusting the placement of the plates and cups with deliberate care. Each motion was measured, precise, A small act of control in a morning that seemed to slip quietly into disarray. Evelyn observed him from the corner of her eye, noting the subtle changes in his expression, the way his smile did not quite reach his eyes, the slight tension in his shoulders as if he were carrying an invisible weight. She poured the chamomile tea into the cups, the steam curling gently into the air, and placed one in front of him, her hand steady, her gaze unwavering. Michael accepted it with a polite nod, his fingers brushing lightly against the rim, and for a moment, the room was filled only with the soft clinking of porcelain and the faint hum of the refrigerator. Evelyn reflected on the hours she had spent preparing for this morning, the careful planning and anticipation, and the strange unease that now colored the day. The sunlight shifted across the room, highlighting the gleam of the polished silverware and casting delicate patterns on the floor. She moved to the window and adjusted the curtains slightly, peering outside at the quiet street, the early morning light illuminating the familiar neighborhood that had witnessed decades of her family life. Inside, the tension remained palpable, each word exchanged measured and restrained. Michael spoke of mundane topics, the weather, the upcoming week, and Evelyn responded with a calm, composed tone, careful not to reveal the growing sense of disappointment and suspicion that had taken root within her. She remembered the promise he had made weeks before, the reassurance that he would honor the day and their shared understanding, and the way those words had lifted her spirits, giving her hope that this morning would unfold with warmth and connection. Yet now, she noticed the subtle shifts in his demeanor, the pauses, the deflections, the way he glanced at his watch and the clock on the wall as if time itself were conspiring to distract him from the importance of the day. Evelyn's eyes scanned the room again, taking in the familiar surroundings, the photographs on the walls capturing moments of joy and milestones achieved, and a quiet determination settled within her. She would not allow the uncertainty to overwhelm her, would not let the undercurrent of betrayal erode the calm she maintained. She continued to move with purpose, arranging the items on the table, adjusting the linens, her movements deliberate, each action a small assertion of the dignity she carried. The soft tick of the antique clock filled the spaces between the words, a rhythmic reminder of the passing minutes and the weight of anticipation that hung in the air. Michael's responses remained polite but detached, his gestures precise yet lacking the warmth that Evelyn remembered from years past. The contrast between expectation and reality created a quiet tension, a space where thought and observation intertwined, and Evelyn held herself with poise, observing, noting, processing each small indication that all was not as it seemed. The sunlight shifted once more, bathing the room in a golden glow, and Evelyn felt a subtle shift within herself, a readiness to face the unfolding day with clear eyes, measured thoughts, and the quiet strength that had been honed through years of experience and care. Each step, each placement of a cup, each adjustment of the napkin, became a testament to her composure, her attention to detail, and her awareness of the fragility of the moment, allowing her to navigate the morning with a steady mind, quietly absorbing the subtle cues and preparing for whatever revelations the day might bring. Evelyn Carter remained seated at the head of the polished oak table, her hands folded gently in her lap as she observed Michael from across the room. The sunlight shifted slightly, casting long shadows that traced the contours of the silverware and the edges of the linen placemats. Every detail of the morning had been arranged with care, yet the subtle tension in the air had grown, a quiet undercurrent of unease that she felt with every breath. Michael sipped his tea slowly, his movements deliberate, the slight furrow in his brow betraying a thought he did not voice. Evelyn noted it without reaction, her eyes steady, scanning the room with a composed curiosity, the photographs on the wall, capturing birthdays, graduations, and quiet afternoons in the garden, seemed to watch silently, witnesses to the unfolding morning. She remembered the conversations they had shared weeks ago, the promise of respect and attentiveness he had given, and the contrast of his current demeanor weighed against those words made the air feel taut. Evelyn allowed her gaze to linger on the small details. The delicate patterns etched into the porcelain cups, the polished surface of the table reflecting the soft morning light, the careful alignment of the napkins and cutlery. Each observation was a thread in the quiet tapestry of awareness she was weaving, noting the changes in tone, posture, and expression. Michael spoke of upcoming appointments and minor errands, his words casual, yet each one seemed to skirt the importance of the day, as if he were testing the boundaries without stating it aloud. Evelyn responded with measured nods and calm affirmations, her voice even, carrying a subtle steadiness that contrasted with the unspoken tension. The room seemed to stretch, a space of observation and reflection, where every sound, the clink of china, the soft hiss of steam from the tea, the ticking of the clock, served to mark the passing of moments that would become significant in memory. She noticed a slight hesitation in Michael as he reached for a scone, his hand pausing mid-air before settling lightly on the plate, a small gesture, yet one that spoke volumes to Evelyn. She allowed herself a quiet acknowledgement, a silent filing of each detail into the mental ledger she maintained, a record of the day as it unfolded. The afternoon light shifted through the windows, warming the edges of the room, and Evelyn felt the gentle pull of time, the hours moving inexorably forward. She maintained her posture, hands folded, movements deliberate, a constant rhythm in contrast to the subtle unpredictability of Michael's actions. The conversation continued, polite but measured, the underlying current of tension unspoken yet present in every glance and gesture. Evelyn's awareness extended to the small inconsistencies, the fleeting expressions, the pauses that stretched just a fraction too long. Each observation was a piece of a puzzle, quietly assembling the picture she needed to understand the full scope of the morning. The house remained quiet beyond the soft hum of everyday life, a cocoon in which the nuances of body language and word choice took on greater weight. Evelyn maintained a gentle, composed presence, a steadying force amid the subtle dissonance, her mind attentive to the unfolding scene, ready to interpret and respond with the careful precision that had defined her life for decades. The sun continued its path, shifting shadows and light across the room, and Evelyn felt a quiet resilience settling over her, a sense of control in the act of observation, of patience, and of the deliberate attention to detail that would guide her through the rest of the day. Evelyn Carter stood quietly, her hands resting on the edge of the polished oak table as she watched Michael rise from his chair, the sunlight catching the faint gray in his hair, and the crease of concern that he had not attempted to hide. The room seemed suspended, the soft ticking of the antique clock marking the passage of each second with a deliberate cadence, the kind that made every motion feel heavier, more significant. She noted the subtle shift in his posture as he adjusted his sleeve, the slight tension in his jaw, the way he avoided her eyes when he spoke. Evelyn's mind moved methodically, cataloging each nuance, each small gesture that hinted at intention she had not anticipated. The polished hardwood floors reflected the morning light, and the delicate fragrance of lilies mingled with the faint aroma of chamomile tea, creating a sense of normalcy at odds with the undercurrent of unease. She remembered the careful planning she had invested in preparing for this morning, the expectation that the day would unfold with mutual respect and attention, and the creeping realization that those expectations might be misplaced. Michael began speaking of errands and meetings he had planned, each word casual in tone. Yet Evelyn could sense the implicit avoidance of the earlier promise, the subtle prioritization of his own agenda over the shared understanding of the day. She listened attentively, responding with calm acknowledgments, her voice even and measured, careful not to reveal the concern rising quietly within her. Her eyes moved across the room, taking in the small details, the arrangement of the silverware, the gleam of the china, the reflections dancing across the polished table's surface, and the framed photographs capturing decades of family moments, frozen in time, silent witnesses to the unfolding dynamics. She felt a quiet tightening in her chest, not from fear, but from the gravity of the subtle betrayals and overlooked commitments that were slowly becoming evident. The soft hum of the refrigerator punctuated the conversation, each sound amplified by the stillness of the space, each pause a marker of anticipation and reflection. Evelyn's thoughts traced the arc of past interactions, the assurances she had received, the warmth that had once filled these exchanges, and the contrast of the present moment, creating a delicate tension she held with poise and awareness. She moved deliberately, adjusting a cup, straightening a napkin, small acts of attention that reinforced her sense of control in a situation that seemed to shift with every exchanged word. Michael's hands rested lightly on the table, tapping occasionally, yet without urgency, his gestures controlled, his expressions guarded. Evelyn's gaze lingered on the subtle inconsistencies, cataloging the faint signs of avoidance, of deflection, and of the unspoken, building a comprehensive awareness of the morning's unfolding reality. The sunlight shifted gradually, illuminating new angles of the room, casting gentle shadows that highlighted the meticulous care she had taken in arranging every aspect of the setting. Evelyn maintained her composure, her quiet presence a counterpoint to the subtle tension, absorbing each detail with clarity, patience, and a silent determination to navigate the morning with calm awareness. Prepared for the moments of revelation yet to come, Evelyn Carter moved toward the window, her hands lightly resting on the sill as she watched the morning light shift across the garden, illuminating the carefully tended flower beds and the stone pathway that led to the gate. Each petal, each leaf seemed sharper, more defined, contrasting with the subtle tension that had settled over the room moments before. Michael's voice floated from the dining area, speaking of appointments and errands, his tone polite but distant, a rhythm of normalcy that did not match the weight Evelyn felt pressing quietly against her chest. She adjusted the curtains slightly, allowing a shaft of sunlight to fall across the polished floor, the warmth a gentle counterpoint to the cool tension in the air. Her eyes moved across the room, noting the subtle shifts in Michael's posture, the way he leaned slightly forward when speaking yet did not make eye contact, the slight hesitation in his gestures that hinted at unease. Evelyn inhaled slowly, the scent of the lilies mingling with the faint aroma of the tea she had poured earlier, grounding her as she processed each detail. She recalled the years of preparation, the hope and careful planning that had gone into the morning, and the quiet disappointment that now settled in the spaces between words and gestures. Every small act she observed became a piece of the unfolding puzzle, cataloging the nuances of tone, inflection, and subtle movement that revealed the gap between expectation and reality. The sunlight shifted again, casting new angles of light and shadow across the room, highlighting the polished surfaces and the meticulous arrangement of the table. Evelyn adjusted a napkin, straightened a cup, and placed a small dish of fruit within reach, each motion deliberate, a quiet assertion of presence and control. Michael glanced at the table occasionally, noting the placement of items, yet his attention seemed divided, his focus elsewhere, an invisible tension connecting his gestures and words. Evelyn's gaze swept across the room, capturing each small motion, each fleeting glance, building a detailed awareness that allowed her to anticipate what might unfold next. The soft ticking of the clock, the hum of the refrigerator, and the faint rustle of the leaves outside created a rhythm that underscored the morning, a quiet counterpoint to the subtle drama playing out in measured gestures and careful words. Evelyn remained poised, her hands steady, her movements deliberate, each small action reinforcing the calm and dignity she maintained while processing the complexities of her son's behavior. She noted the precise timing of his speech, the pauses that stretched just long enough to create a subtle tension, and the slight inconsistencies that hinted at priorities unspoken. Evelyn's presence filled the space with quiet observation, a measured awareness that contrasted with the unspoken undercurrents in the room. The morning light continued its slow progression, illuminating the careful details of the table's setting, the gentle sway of the curtains, and the gleam of the china, all framing the careful watchfulness with which Evelyn absorbed the scene. She allowed herself a moment to breathe, to center her thoughts, to prepare for the continuing unfoldment of the morning with a steady mind, quietly cataloging each detail, each movement, and each nuance that would guide her understanding and response to the delicate balance of observation and anticipation. Evelyn Carter remained seated in the softly lit dining room, her gaze steady on the patterns of light shifting across the polished table, the china and silver reflecting the morning sun in delicate glimmers. She observed Michael as he moved about, noting the slight tension in his movements, the careful control of his gestures, and the measured pace at which he approached each task. Each action seemed deliberate, precise, yet subtly distant, a rhythm that hinted at intentions he had not expressed aloud. Evelyn's eyes swept the room, absorbing every nuance. The flicker of light off the teacup handle, the faint creak of the floor beneath his step, the subtle hesitation as he reached for a napkin. She allowed her mind to catalog these details, each one forming a quiet map of the morning's unfolding dynamics. The aroma of the chamomile tea mingled with the gentle scent of lilies, grounding her senses as she maintained her calm composure, her movements deliberate and unhurried. She adjusted a small dish on the table, smoothing the folds of the napkin beneath it, each motion reinforcing a sense of presence and attention to detail that contrasted with the undercurrent of unease in the room. Michael spoke in clipped, polite sentences, mentioning errands, upcoming appointments, and mundane household matters, yet Evelyn could sense the subtle avoidance in his tone, a careful sidestepping of the significance of the day. She responded with quiet acknowledgments, her voice steady, her expressions minimal, maintaining an air of calm observation while internally noting the nuances of timing, emphasis, and hesitation. The room itself seemed to hold its breath, the gentle hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the antique clock, and the distant calls of birds outside creating a backdrop of normalcy against which every gesture and word took on added weight. Evelyn allowed herself a slow breath, feeling the warmth of the sunlight on her hands as they rested lightly on the table, and observed the slight changes in Michael's demeanor, the tension in his shoulders, the subtle shift in eye contact that spoke more than words ever could. Each small movement, each paused word, and each controlled gesture were registered in her mind, forming a quiet understanding of the layers of intent beneath the surface. She straightened a cup, tilted a plate slightly, and adjusted the placement of a spoon, small acts of order and precision that reinforced her steady presence and provided a contrast to the gentle dissonance around her. Evelyn's awareness extended to the faintest cues, a pause in speech, the angle of a glance, the soft clink of silver against china, each a thread she wove into the quiet tapestry of comprehension she maintained. The sunlight continued to move across the room, illuminating different angles of the table, and the walls lined with photographs capturing years of family life, moments of laughter, achievement, and quiet domesticity, all framing the subtle complexity of the present moment. She remained poised, her posture controlled, her hands resting lightly or moving with careful deliberation, embodying a quiet strength and patience that allowed her to observe, process, and prepare for the remainder of the morning with clarity and a steady mind, cataloging each detail in anticipation of the unfolding events and the decisions she would calmly make in response. Evelyn Carter remained in her seat, the sunlight shifting across the dining room, highlighting the subtle imperfections in the polished table and the gentle texture of the linen placemats. She observed Michael as he stood by the window, adjusting the blinds with a precision that seemed almost automatic, a measure of control masking the unease beneath. Each small movement he made was catalogued in her mind, the angle of his shoulders, the direction of his gaze, the brief hesitations before his words found form. The air held a quiet tension, a stillness that allowed the faint ticking of the antique clock to become a constant reminder of time passing and decisions yet to be made. Evelyn reached for a small dish of berries, arranging them carefully on a plate, her fingers steady, her movements deliberate, a silent assertion of composure in the presence of subtle disruption. The aroma of fresh tea mingled with the faint scent of flowers, a calm backdrop to the delicate dance of observation and anticipation unfolding in the room. Michael spoke in clipped, careful sentences, mentioning schedules and minor tasks, his tone courteous yet distant, his words measured, avoiding the weight of the morning's significance. Evelyn responded in kind, each acknowledgement neutral yet attentive, her voice steady, her expressions minimal, maintaining an air of quiet observation while internally tracking every nuance. The photographs along the walls caught the shifting sunlight, framing decades of family history, laughter, and milestones, a silent witness to the contrast between memory and present reality. Evelyn allowed herself a slow breath, noting the subtle cues of avoidance, the micro-expressions, and the careful orchestration of gestures, each one contributing to the intricate pattern of understanding she was weaving. The polished silverware reflected the light, the porcelain cups held the steam of recently poured tea, and the gentle hum of the refrigerator provided a constant backdrop, amplifying the significance of each sound and movement in the room. She adjusted a napkin, tilted a small plate, straightened the silver, small acts of order that reinforced her presence and control, offering a counterpoint to the understated tension surrounding Michael. The morning continued to unfold with measured interactions, subtle shifts, and quiet observations, each element adding to Evelyn's growing awareness of the day's delicate balance. Her focus extended to the faintest details, a pause in speech, a slight change in posture, the angle of a glance, the soft touch of hands on smooth surfaces, all catalogued with patience and clarity. Evelyn remained poised, embodying a quiet strength, moving through the morning with careful deliberation, her attention to detail a shield and a tool, allowing her to absorb the atmosphere, interpret each signal, and prepare silently for the moments yet to come with composure and insight. Evelyn Carter remained quietly at the table, her eyes sweeping over the familiar surroundings of the dining room, noting the subtle shifts in light across the polished surfaces and the gentle play of shadows on the walls lined with photographs of family memories. Michael sat across from her, his hands resting lightly on the table, fingers tapping occasionally, each movement deliberate yet lacking the warmth that had once filled these interactions. The soft aroma of chamomile tea lingered in the air, mingling with the delicate scent of the lilies, grounding Evelyn in the present moment as she observed with calm attentiveness. She adjusted the placement of a small dish of fruit, straightened a napkin, and moved a silver spoon slightly to align with the china cup, small acts of precision that reinforced her presence and attention to detail. Michael spoke of appointments and minor obligations, his tone polite, controlled, yet distant, revealing the careful balance he maintained between civility and avoidance of the day's significance. Evelyn responded with measured nods and quiet affirmations, her voice steady, her expressions subtle, maintaining a composed exterior while internally observing every nuance. The sunlight shifted across the room, illuminating the fine lines on the polished table and highlighting the reflections in the delicate china, emphasizing the meticulous care she had invested in preparing the morning. She catalogued each movement, each glance, each slight hesitation, forming a quiet map of intentions and unspoken priorities. The antique clock ticked steadily, each sound accentuating the passage of moments, drawing attention to the rhythm of the morning and the delicate tension that remained between mother and son. Evelyn's gaze lingered on the photographs, capturing decades of shared history, frozen smiles, and joyful occasions, a stark contrast to the measured and restrained energy now permeating the room. She allowed herself a slow breath, feeling the warmth of the sunlight on her hands and the gentle hum of life in the house, and noted the subtle inconsistencies in Michael's demeanor, the slight tension in his shoulders, the careful timing of his speech, the angle of his gaze, all signaling the complex interplay of awareness, intention, and unspoken thought. Evelyn continued to move through the space with deliberate grace, small adjustments to the table and its settings, each motion reinforcing her quiet strength and composure. The atmosphere held a delicate balance between familiarity and tension, the ordinary details of the home juxtaposed with the understated conflict unfolding in measured glances and careful gestures. She observed, catalogued, and absorbed, each moment adding to her understanding of the unfolding situation, preparing her mind and spirit to navigate the remainder of the morning with calm insight, patience, and the steady presence that had defined her approach to both family and life for decades. Evelyn Carter rose slowly from her chair, her hands brushing lightly across the smooth surface of the table as she took in the room one final time, noting the glimmer of sunlight on the polished silverware, the subtle reflections dancing across the delicate china, and the quiet alignment of each carefully arranged napkin. The gentle aroma of chamomile and lilies still lingered, grounding her as she moved with deliberate calm toward the window, observing the shifting patterns of light and shadow across the garden outside, the well-tended flower beds and stone pathway reflecting years of careful attention and care. Michael remained at the table, his posture controlled yet subtly distant, polite nod here, a measured gesture there. His movements precise but revealing little of the morning's significance. Evelyn's gaze traced the familiar contours of the room, the photographs on the walls capturing moments of laughter and milestones achieved, each image a quiet reminder of the history she had nurtured and preserved. She allowed herself a slow breath, the weight of observation settling into a composed awareness, cataloging each detail, each pause in speech, each nuance of gesture, and each subtle shift in tone, understanding that the morning had unfolded in measured steps, revealing more through what was unsaid than through words spoken. The soft ticking of the antique clock marked the passing seconds, a steady rhythm against which every movement, glance, and expression seemed amplified, and Evelyn moved through the space with quiet intention, straightening a cup, adjusting a dish, arranging the silver with meticulous care, small acts that reinforced her calm presence and her measured control over the unfolding environment. She observed the faintest inconsistencies, the slight tension in Michael's shoulders, the careful timing of his speech, and the angle of his glance, cataloging these elements with precision, understanding the subtle dynamics at play and preparing herself to navigate what remained of the day with awareness and composure. The sunlight shifted once more, illuminating the delicate textures of the table linens, the gleam of the polished surfaces, and the soft edges of the photographs capturing decades of family life. Evelyn allowed herself to feel the quiet satisfaction of observation and understanding, a serene confidence that came from years of attention, patience, and deliberate awareness. Each measured step, each small adjustment, each moment of stillness contributed to a growing sense of clarity, a quiet power derived from knowing, watching, and absorbing without disturbance. The room held its quiet rhythm, a space of observation and reflection, with Evelyn at its center, poised and attentive, moving with gentle deliberation and silent strength, prepared to meet the remainder of the morning with the same composed awareness, quiet dignity, and unshakable presence that had guided her through decades of life, family, and carefully navigated moments of delicate human interaction.